Sin, a Grail Message clarification for humankind. Understanding what it is, how it works, and the path to freedom. Dedication. To all souls who wander beneath the weight of guilt. To all who stumble under burdens they cannot name. To all who fear that they have fallen too far. This work is dedicated to you. May the light that calls to every human spirit find a path into your longing heart, and awaken in you the certainty that no chain is stronger than truth, and no darkness deeper than the light that streams from the Creator. Preface. The cry of the bound soul. There is a silent cry rising from humanity today, a cry more ancient than civilizations, more persistent than the shifting creeds of men. It is the cry of the bound soul, caught in entanglements it does not comprehend, stumbling through consequences that appear unjust, and suffering under burdens it never consciously intended to create. Everywhere, the modern human being feels hunted by something invisible. A shadow that follows. A weight that presses. A fear that whispers, "You are not free." This cry is nothing other than the cry of the soul trapped in sin. Not the distorted meaning of sin inherited from religious fear. Not the emotionalized shame imposed by institutions. Not the guilt manufactured by tradition. But the real, living phenomenon of sin is explained through the light of the Grail Message. Sin is not primarily moral failure. It is not the violation of human rules. It is not the breaking of a religious custom. Sin is the deviation from divine order. It is the voluntary misuse of the human will, contrary to the eternal laws that govern creation. Because humanity has lost the knowledge of these laws, it no longer recognizes sin when it steps into it. Therefore it suffers its consequences blindly. This book was born from the need to give clarity to the confused, the fallen, the searching, the broken, the self-deceived, the sincerely striving, and those who do not yet know that they are trapped. It is written for every human spirit that wishes to live again in purity, peace, and harmony with the will of its Creator. The Grail Message shines light upon all things. In this light, sin is unmasked, not to condemn, but to liberate. For sin loses its power the moment it is recognized. May this work be a lamp for those who walk in darkness, and a sword for those who are ready to fight for their freedom. Acknowledgements. This book could only exist because light still speaks to the human spirit, calling it upward even in times of deep confusion. I acknowledge the Grail Message, whose radiance alone provides the clarity required to understand the true nature of sin and the path out of it. All earnest seekers, whose struggles, questions, and longing hearts have inspired this work and shaped its voice. Those who have fallen deeply, yet still desire the light. Your courage to rise has given this book its urgency. Those who have overcome, whose quiet victories are the living proof that sin is not the final word, but a condition that can be outgrown and overcome through right recognition and alignment with the laws of creation. To all who walk this path, may the light guide your steps. Introduction. The age of confusion and the need for clarification. Humanity stands today in the midst of its greatest spiritual confusion. Light and darkness mingle in the thoughts of men. Truth and deception run side by side. Voices rise from every direction: religious, scientific, mystical, psychological, secular, each claiming authority over the human soul. Yet beneath this noise, a deeper crisis grows. Humanity no longer understands what sin is. Some deny its existence entirely. Some trivialize it. Some romanticize it. Some weaponize it. And others drown beneath its consequences, without knowing what has ensnared them. In ancient times, people at least recognized that their suffering was connected to their actions. Today, the modern human being imagines himself free of consequences simply because he no longer believes in them. But the laws of creation remain. They are eternal, immovable, and incorruptible. They do not bend for opinion, philosophy, or culture. Wherever there is deviation from these laws, suffering must arise. And wherever suffering arises, there has been a deviation, even when the person is unaware. This book exists to restore sight, where blindness has become normal. What this book will do: you will not find dogma here. You will not find condemnation. You will not find arguments for the superiority of any religion. Instead, you will find spiritual explanation grounded in the laws of creation, clarification that dissolves centuries of confusion, revelation of how sin actually forms and binds, a clear path of liberation, practical guidance for daily purification, a universal message for all humanity. This book is addressed to those who sin knowingly, to those who sin unknowingly, to those who suffer under consequences they do not understand, to those whose hearts long for purity, to those trapped in habits they hate, to those weary of guilt, and to those who yearn for a life aligned with the will of their Creator. The light that clarifies all things. The Grail Message explains life in a way that leaves no gaps. Its clarity is like sunlight entering a darkened room. Suddenly, everything becomes visible. This book stands upon that clarity. Every explanation given here aligns with the immutable laws that govern the destiny of human spirits. For this reason, you will find no speculation in this writing, and no personal theories. Only truth born of recognition, conveyed in a language meant for earnest seekers everywhere. An invitation. The journey ahead is not one of fear, but one of illumination. Read with an open spirit. Allow the light to reveal what lies hidden in you. Let your conscience awaken. Let your inner being come to life again. For there is no human soul beyond redemption. Only those who refuse to turn toward the light. This book is a hand extended. Take it, and let us walk upward, out of darkness, into the clarity of divine truth. Part 1. The Nature of Sin. Chapter 1. Sin is a disturbance of divine order. Where the harmony of the law is broken, suffering must arise. Sin is one of the most misunderstood realities in human existence. For centuries, mankind has clothed this word in fear, superstition, religious emotion, and cultural interpretation. Entire systems of theology have been built upon misunderstandings of sin. Entire traditions have buried it beneath rituals. Many have rejected the concept entirely because what they were presented with was not truth, but distortion. Yet suffering continues. Bondage continues. Darkness continues. Human beings continue to struggle with forces within themselves they cannot explain. This alone proves sin exists, whether men believe in it or not. But what is sin? To answer this, one must step beyond the inherited views of religion, psychology, or philosophy and look into the eternal laws of creation, the very framework through which God governs all existence. Only in His laws does the real meaning of sin become clear. 1. Sin is not primarily moral failure. Humanity has reduced sin to moral error or ethical violation. But morality changes with cultures, eras, and opinions. What one nation calls wrong, another calls acceptable. What one century condemns, the next celebrates. If sin depended on human opinion, the laws of creation would be unstable, and God would be unjust. Yet the order of creation is perfect, unchanging, and incorruptible. Therefore, sin cannot be defined by the moral customs of men. Sin is defined only by the eternal laws woven into creation itself. The truth is simple. Sin is any movement of the human will that opposes the divine will. Wherever the human spirit acts contrary to the harmony of the law, there arises a disturbance. And that disturbance is sin. 2. Sin is deviation. Everything in creation functions in perfect order. From the orbit of stars to the growth of a seed. From the formation of thoughts to the weaving of spiritual threads. All stands under law. Sin is the opposite of this order. It is distortion, misuse, misdirection of the human will. The Grail Message explains. Where the human spirit employs the wrong volition, it tears itself away from the luminous threads of the law. Sin, therefore, is not an object. It is a condition. It arises when the human spirit wills wrongly, desires wrongly, thinks wrongly, or acts wrongly, in relation to the divine order. Whether the person meant well is irrelevant. The law reacts to the nature of the will, not the excuses surrounding it. 3. Sin is a real disturbance, not a symbolic one. Sin produces immediate consequences in the fine material and spiritual realms, even when these are invisible to the physical eye. A distorted thought creates distorted form. A selfish desire attracts dark forces. A hateful volition weaves bonds that tie the spirit downward. Sin is therefore objective, not psychological. It is not just feeling guilty. It is not emotional shame. It is not the fear of punishment. It is a literal disturbance of the energetic harmony of the law, which immediately begins to weave effects that must someday return to the originator. Thus, sin is not punished. Sin punishes itself through the laws. God does not strike. The law fulfills. 4. Sin always brings disturbance, even when the outer life appears successful. There are those who commit wrong yet prosper outwardly. There are those who live in moral error without visible consequence. This leads many to deny sin entirely. But appearances deceive. The human spirit is not confined to one lifetime. The consequences of sin are attached not to the body, but to the soul substance of the human spirit. A person may escape earthly consequences, but he cannot escape the laws that bind the beyond. And when the moment of transition comes, and the veil falls, everything the person thought he avoided stands before him in unalterable reality. No soul escapes the effects of its own volition. Not in this life. Not in the next. Not anywhere in creation. Thus, nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever forgotten. Everything is carried with you, until it is redeemed through recognition and change. 5. Sin is separation from the light. Above all, sin is the human spirit turning away from the radiance of the light. Whenever the human being closes himself to truth, clings to self-will, rejects guidance, follows the intellect against the intuition, indulges in impurity, acts out of arrogance or desire for domination, he closes himself to the currents of the light. This self-closing is the deepest core of sin. The light never withdraws. It is the human being who withdraws himself. The more he does this, the darker his inner world becomes. The darker his inner world becomes, the more he is drawn toward forms, beings, and currents that match this darkness. Thus sin leads always to inner emptiness, spiritual weakness, moral confusion, increasing bondage, and finally spiritual suffocation. Sin is not punished by God. Sin is the punishment, because it separates the human spirit from the source of life. 6. Sin is the misuse of the creative power given to the human spirit. Every human spirit carries within itself a spark of free will. This will is creative. It produces forms. It attracts forces. It shapes destiny. When used in purity, the human spirit builds upward and becomes a blessing to all creation. When misused, the same power becomes destructive, and this destruction is sin. Thus, the human being sins, not because he is weak, but because he is powerful. It is precisely the magnitude of his spiritual creative power that makes sin possible. The laws take every volition seriously, because volition creates reality. This understanding should awaken both awe and responsibility. 7. The first step out of sin is recognition. Sin thrives in darkness. It grows wherever there is ignorance, self-deception, excuse-making, or denial. The moment the soul truly sees it's wrong, sin loses its inner power. Recognition breaks the illusion. Recognition opens the inner eye. Recognition allows light to enter. This is why the Grail message teaches so strongly. Awaken. Recognize what you have become. For recognition is not the end of the path, but it is the doorway into redemption. A person cannot step out of chains he refuses to see. A person cannot ascend while defending what drags him down. Thus, the purpose of this chapter, and of this entire book, is to awaken recognition. 8. Why this teaching is needed now. Humanity is surrounded by consequences it can no longer ignore. Nations are collapsing under spiritual darkness. Families are breaking under generational chains. Individuals are drowning in addictions, lusts, and inner turmoil. The earth itself groans under mankind's deviations. But these are not punishments from God. They are the harvest of centuries of wrong volition. The natural outworking of the law. The age of excuses is over. The time of clarity has come. Only recognition can save what is left. This book is given, not to frighten, but to illuminate. Not to condemn, but to liberate. For the human spirit is meant for the light. And the light calls out even now. Chapter 2. The root of sin, the break from the living law. Sin, in its truest sense, is not first an act. It is a condition, a stance of the human spirit in relation to the will of God. To understand sin, one must understand law, for all existence, from the smallest vibration in the atoms to the vast cycles of stars, moves in perfect obedience to the laws of the Creator. Nothing can step outside them, except the human spirit in its free decision-making. This chapter brings clarity where confusion has long prevailed. 1. The eternal law, the structure of truth. The Grail message teaches that God's will is not an arbitrary command or shifting decree, it is the living law woven into creation. It governs sowing and reaping, motion and return, purity and ascent, impurity and descent, attraction of homogeneous species, spiritual growth through experiencing, the inexorable return of consequences. In this law lies the foundation of what is good. Sin is therefore simply and solemnly a deviation from the law that governs life. Not a deviation as defined by men. Not a deviation as defined by personal opinions. Not a deviation defined culturally or socially. But a deviation from the eternal, objective, incorruptible will of the Creator. It is rebellion, not against a doctrine or religion, but against the structure of creation itself. A human spirit cannot violate this structure without harm. As one who jumps off a cliff cannot avoid the consequence of the fall, so one who steps out of the law cannot avoid the repercussion of sin. This is the root. 2. How sin began, the turning away. Sin did not begin with an act in the physical world. It began before the act. It began with spiritual indolence, lukewarmness, arrogance, the illusion of self-sufficiency, the desire to shape life according to one's own will rather than God's. Before the first outward wrongdoing, there was a turning away. Just as darkness begins not with night itself but with the vanishing of the sun's rays. Sin began with the human spirit turning its gaze away from the light. The Grail message explains that the first great fall of humanity was not gross evil, but something subtler. Complacency, self-will, the desire to try one's own way, no longer attentively listening upward. This opened the door to everything that followed. Once the human spirit broke connection with the laws of the light, the natural consequences accumulated, forming what we now call sin. Thus sin is not first what you do, but what you become through consistent inner deviation. 3. The nature of sin, a vibration out of harmony. Everything in creation vibrates. It is either in harmony or disharmony with the primordial purity of the light. A pure thought harmonizes upward. A noble deed echoes through creation. A loving word aligns with the radiations of God's will. But hatred, envy, sensual indulgence, dishonesty, cowardice, hypocrisy, impurity, self-exaltation, these generate vibrations out of harmony, which accumulate around the human spirit like layers of dense, dark matter. This is not symbolic. It is literal. Sin is density, a tangible darkness in the fine material spheres, which drags the spirit downward and binds it to lower regions where similar vibrations dwell. A person is not condemned by God. They are drawn downward by the weight of what they have made themselves through their choices. This is the justice of the law. 4. Sin is a chain, how one wrongdoing produces the next. Once a spirit strays from the laws, consequences arise that attract further deviations. A lie demands another lie. Lust demands deeper indulgence. Greed demands more acquisition. Pride demands constant validation. Anger demands new fuel. Cowardice demands endless escape. This chain reaction is not punishment, it is logical consequence. Once a human spirit vibrates wrongly, it attracts the wrong thoughts, the wrong people, the wrong impulses, wrong opportunities, wrong reactions. It becomes entangled. Thus sin is not a single act. It is a network of consequences, a self-woven web that tightens around the soul until the person no longer knows how to escape. This is why many feel stuck, bound, or hopeless. They are experiencing the return of what they once freely chose. But this, too, is grace, because through experiencing consequences, the spirit may wake up. 5. The misleading comfort, why people no longer fear sin. Modern humanity no longer fears sin because it no longer understands law. Religion spoke of sin as breaking rules. Humanity classified sins into big and small. Philosophers dismissed sin as psychology. The enlightened rebranded it as personal freedom. Science ignored it altogether. Yet none of this changes reality. Ignorance of gravity does not make a fall less dangerous. Ignorance of divine law does not lessen the consequence of sin. The Grail Message clarifies. Every seed brings its fruit, whether you understand the seed or not. The laws operate with perfect precision. Thus, sin remains active even when unrecognized. Humanity's tragedy is not its wrongdoing. It is its blindness to the effects of its wrongdoing. 6. Why God does not intervene. At the core of human misunderstanding lies a false expectation that God should prevent sin or cancel its consequences. But the Creator does not intervene in His laws. He is those laws. If He were to suspend them for one person, for one moment, then justice would fail. Harmony would collapse. Creation would disintegrate. Instead, the laws themselves contain everything needed for salvation. They guide. They warn. They educate. They correct. They uplift the earnest. The consequences of sin exist not to destroy, but to awaken, to steer the spirit back toward the light, to break the illusion that one can live without God's will. Every pain from sin is meant to heal. Every fall is meant to humble. Every regret invites return. Every darkness is a call to light. This is the mercy within the justice. 7. The hope hidden within the truth about sin. The more clearly one sees sin, the more clearly one sees the path out. For no chain made by one's own hands is too strong for one's own decision to break. No darkness is too dense for light to penetrate. If the spirit genuinely opens itself, no fall is too deep for the hand of the laws to lift. When a person chooses upward striving, sin is not final. It is not identity. It is not destiny. It is simply the result of spiritual deviation. And deviations can be corrected the moment one genuinely aligns again with the will of God. This is the beginning of redemption. This is the beginning of clarity. This is the beginning of rebirth. Chapter 3. Sin and Guilt, the Distortion of Conscience. Guilt is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human life. Many believe it is an emotion sent by God to punish the sinner. Others believe it is a psychological burden that must be dissolved through self-acceptance. Some suppress it entirely, calling it weakness. Many endure it silently, never understanding its purpose. And countless others mistake genuine guilt for false guilt, and false guilt for genuine guilt. The Grail Message brings rare clarity. Guilt is not punishment, it is a natural consequence within the laws, meant to guide the spirit back to harmony. But like everything else in creation, guilt can be distorted, misunderstood, misused, or drowned out. This chapter reveals what guilt truly is, how sin creates it, and how it becomes a pathway, not a prison, for the earnest soul. 1. The true origin of guilt, the spirit's pain at its own deviation. In the realm of truth, guilt is not imposed externally. It is born within the human spirit when it recognizes, even faintly, that it has departed from the will of God. This recognition is instinctive. It rises from spiritual intuition, not from the intellect. When a person sins, the spirit feels the disharmony between its true nature and the lower actions, desires, or thoughts it allowed itself to follow. This inner discord produces a sensation we call guilt, but in reality it is the spirit's longing to return to purity. The cry of conscience. The pain of distance from the light. The discomfort of being out of harmony with the law. Guilt is thus not condemnation. It is the first stir of awakening. It is the spirit saying, I am not where I belong. 2. Conscience. The silent voice of the spirit. Conscience is the connection point between the spirit and the laws of God. It is not culture. It is not upbringing. It is not social morality. It is not inherited values. It is not religious indoctrination. True conscience is the spiritual sense of rightness. The echo of the light within the spirit. The guiding vibration aligned with the divine will. Before humanity clouded its inner senses through arrogance, sensuality, materialism, and intellectual domination, conscience was clear, immediate, and unmistakable. But as the inner purity dimmed, conscience became muted, buried deep beneath layers of rationalization, emotional noise, societal conditioning, religious misunderstanding, personal desires. Thus, guilt is simply what occurs when conscience manages to pierce through the clouds and make itself known. 3. False guilt. When the intellect imitates the voice of conscience. Not all guilt comes from the spirit. There is false guilt, born of manipulation, religious fear, human expectations, intellectual doctrines, childhood influence, psychological conditioning. This guilt appears when people say, I feel guilty because society disapproves. I feel guilty because my pastor said this is wrong. I feel guilty because others expect differently. I feel guilty when I fail to meet standards I did not set. False guilt is heavy, confusing, and draining. It does not uplift. It does not illuminate. It does not lead the soul back to purity. True guilt produces clarity. False guilt produces anxiety. True guilt points upward. False guilt points inward or sideways. True guilt strengthens the will. False guilt weakens it. The Grail Message warns that humanity often mistakes the pressure of others for the voice of God. False guilt is one of the greatest chains used to keep people in spiritual stagnation. 4. The death of guilt. When conscience falls silent. There are those who no longer feel guilt at all. They are not innocent. They are not free. They are not strong. They are not enlightened. Their conscience is simply buried so deeply under layers of self-will, impurity, and vanity that it no longer reaches the surface. This is among the most dangerous conditions a human spirit can fall into. The habitual sinner, numb to wrongdoing. The intellectual who rationalizes every deviation. The proud who can never admit fault. The sensual who drowns out conscience with pleasure. The self-willed who refuses any light except their own. This deadening of conscience is not freedom. It is imprisonment in darkness. Such a person is like one walking toward a cliff in broad daylight, yet thinking the silence around him means he is safe. The cliff does not move because one cannot see it. 5. How sin clouds conscience. The mechanics of inner blindness. Sin darkens conscience in stages. Stage 1. The gentle warning. A subtle discomfort, a quiet unease, a whisper urging reflection. Stage 2. The rationalization. The person starts to explain away the discomfort. It's not so bad. Others do worse. I have a reason. Nobody will know. Stage 3. Repetition. The same wrongdoing is repeated, forming grooves within the astral coverings of the soul. Stage 4. Thickening of the coverings. Each repetition adds density to the fine material layers surrounding the spirit. Stage 5. Inner blindness. The conscience can no longer penetrate the heavy, dark layers. Stage 6. Complete anesthesia. The person no longer feels guilt at all. This is not a sign of moral evolution. It is evidence of deep spiritual decline. 6. The purpose of true guilt. A call to return. True guilt is a gift of mercy. It is the last bridge between the sinner and redemption. When conscience stirs, the spirit is being offered. A warning. A chance to turn back. An invitation to purification. A path upward. The Grail Message explains that every pang of true guilt is like a ray of light piercing the fog around the soul. It says, you can still return. You can still change. You can still live. Those who listen to this call, even weakly, are already on their way upward. Guilt is never meant to crush. It is meant to awaken. It is not a weapon. It is guidance. It is not condemnation. It is correction. 7. The first step out of sin, accepting responsibility without self-torment. The first step in the liberation from sin is not punishment, confession, or self-loathing. It is a simple, powerful act. Acknowledgement. The human spirit must say clearly within itself, I have deviated from the will of God. Not, I am worthless. I am doomed. I am unforgivable. These thoughts are destructive and never arise from the light. The light is clear, direct, and freeing. The acknowledgement of guilt is the opening of the soul's closed door. When a person accepts responsibility, the dense layers begin to crack. When they stop blaming others, the coverings begin to loosen. When they face the truth honestly, the upward current begins to flow. This is the beginning of salvation. Chapter 4. The birth of wrong desire. How sin takes shape in the inner being. Every human action begins long before the hand moves, the tongue speaks, or the body acts. It begins in the unseen realm within the human being, in the world of desire, imagination, and volition. Sin does not appear suddenly or unexpectedly. It is conceived, nurtured, and matured within, until it finally breaks into outward expression. The Grail Message teaches that the inner process leading to sin is governed by definite spiritual laws, laws as exact as gravity, as impartial as light, and as just as the rhythm of creation itself. This chapter reveals how wrong desire is born, how it grows, and how it becomes sin, so that every earnest seeker may understand its mechanics and thereby break free from its grip. 1. The seed of desire, the first movement of the will. Desire begins with a movement of the inner will. This movement is small, subtle, almost imperceptible. It may arise from a thought, a memory, a feeling, a suggestion from another person, a picture, an influence from the environment, or even an inner inclination formed long ago. The first movement is neutral. It is simply a stirring of energy within the human being. What gives this desire its direction, upward toward the good or downward toward sin, is how the human being responds. If the spirit is awake, anchored in purity, the desire is immediately lifted upward, ennobled, clarified, or rejected. If the spirit is weakened, clouded, or inattentive, the desire begins to attract that which is similar to its baser aspects, drawing nourishment from lower influences in the environment. Thus the very first response of the human being determines the eventual outcome. 2. The role of imagination, the workshop of formation. The Grail Message explains that imagination is formative. It is the workshop where desires are shaped into forms in the fine material worlds. Every time a person returns mentally to a desire, thinking about it, picturing it, contemplating it, emotionally feeding it, justifying it, fantasizing about it, they breathe life into the fine material forms associated with that desire. These forms, once strengthened, become independent entities, energetic structures that surround the individual, influencing their feelings, thoughts, and impulses. Wrong desire thus becomes a living companion that pushes and pulls the person toward the deed. This is why the Grail Message says, you become the creator of forms that then influence you in return. Wrong desire, once nourished, no longer needs conscious thought. It begins to whisper from within the coverings of the soul. Do this. You want this. You need this. You deserve this. No one will know. It is not so bad. The person then mistakes these influences for their own natural will. But they are not. They are self-created shadows. 3. Attraction to the similar. How desire draws power. Everything in creation obeys the law of attraction of homogeneous species. A wrong desire resonates with lower astral energies, impure forms already created by others, the desires of people with the same inclination, lingering influences from past actions. Thus the desire grows, not only through the person's own imagination, but also through resonance with all similar vibrations in the world. A single impure inclination becomes a magnet for entire realms of impurity. And so the desire gains strength far beyond what the person consciously wants. This is how a small inner movement becomes an addiction, a vice, an obsession, a compulsion, a habit, or a sin. The person may then say, I don't know how it became so strong. I didn't intend for it to go this far. But according to the laws, it could not have happened otherwise. What is nourished, lives. What lives, grows. What grows, gains power. 4. The moment of consent, where sin begins. There is a critical moment in the development of wrong desire, a moment when the human spirit gives consent. This is the true beginning of sin. Before this point, the desire may be a temptation, a suggestion, a trial, a testing, an influence. But it is not yet sin. Sin begins the moment the will agrees with the lower inclination. Consent may look like, let it remain in my mind. I want this, even if it is wrong. I will consider it. I will allow myself to imagine it more clearly. Even if I don't do it outwardly, I will enjoy it inwardly. Sin begins long before the external act. The consent is the turning away from the light. Once the will has given consent, the desire becomes a living thread binding the human spirit to the lower realm that nourishes it. This is the spiritual meaning of the teaching. Everyone who looks at another with lust has already committed adultery in the heart. The outward act is simply the final expression of what has already occurred spiritually. 5. The deed, the final birth of sin. When the desire has matured through imagination, resonance, repetition, and consent, it eventually seeks physical expression. This is the birth of sin in the gross material world. The deed is the crown of the inner process, the outer imprint of the inner departure, the harvest of the spiritual seed. But note this: the deed is not the beginning. It is the consequence. By the time the hand moves, the sin is already old. This is why outward moralism fails. It targets the act, ignoring the inner process that produced it. True purification must begin in the origin, not in the symptoms. 6. Why good intentions cannot undo wrong desire. Many people believe that if they mean well, their wrong desires do not count. But intention is not enough. The laws of creation respond to the actual direction of the will, the actual images formed, the actual desires nourished, the actual consent given. Good intentions are powerless unless the will is aligned with them. A person may say, "I do not want to sin," yet continues to feed the desire with imagination, emotion, and consent. This contradiction leads to confusion and inner conflict. Good intentions are like seeds left on a stone, they cannot grow unless planted in the will. 7. The turning point, how desire can be transformed before it becomes sin. The miracle of the spiritual laws is that wrong desire can be stopped at many stages. 1. At the first stirring. A simple no from the spirit dissolves it. 2. In imagination. Refusing to picture the desire starves it. 3. In consent. Withdrawing willingness breaks its spine. 4. In repetition. Replacing the old pattern with a higher one uproots the old form. 5. In the deed. Making amends and changing direction begins healing. There is no stage at which redemption is impossible. But the earlier the intervention, the easier the liberation. 8. For those trapped, why wrong desire feels unbreakable. Many who are deep in sin feel powerless against their desires. They have built such strong forms around their souls that these forms act like chains, cages, magnetic pulls, inner voices, compulsions. But even the strongest form is still created by the human spirit. And what the human spirit created can also be destroyed through the light that comes when the will turns upward again. This is why the Grail Message says, the moment the human being truly wills, help streams to him from all sides. No desire is stronger than the spirit that birthed it. It only appears strong because the spirit has weakened itself. When the spirit awakens, the desire begins to starve. When the spirit turns to the light, the desire begins to die. When the spirit calls for help, the desire begins to fall away. Conscience, intuition, inner warning voice. Among the most profound faculties of the human spirit is the ability to perceive right from wrong, not merely through external laws, but through inner recognition. This faculty, often called conscience, is the whisper of the Creator within the soul. It is accompanied by intuition, a subtle knowing that transcends reason, and an inner warning voice, which alerts man to impending missteps. Conscience is not learned, it is innate. From earliest infancy, every human possesses it. But life, experiences, and misdirection can dull it. When the spirit aligns with material desires, the voice grows faint. When it turns toward the light, the voice becomes a guiding star. Intuition, the deeper expression of the conscience, often speaks in impressions, feelings, or a quiet certainty that is independent of intellectual reasoning. It reveals the path of life in moments of choice. The inner warning voice manifests as subtle unease, disquiet, or hesitation when approaching an act that conflicts with the laws of creation. To ignore it is to invite error, to heed it is to safeguard the spirit. Man's challenge is to listen, distinguish, and obey. The Grail Message teaches that these faculties are the direct bridge to the living law and the first protection against sin. To turn away from them is to sever the lifeline to divine guidance. Part 2. How Sin Enslaves. Chapter 5. The Web of Darkness, How Repeated Sin Forms Chains. Every human action leaves an imprint upon the soul. When that action is misaligned with the laws of creation, it forms a thread of darkness. One sin is a single thread, repeated sins weave an intricate web. This web is invisible to the physical eye but felt deeply by the spirit. Each thread binds the soul more tightly, restricting freedom, clouding judgment, and drawing the individual closer to habitual patterns of error. The Grail Message teaches that sin is not merely a moral failure, it is an energetic reality. The threads of the web are composed of spiritual tension, dissonance, and misdirected life force. When ignored, These threads interlock, forming chains that grow stronger with repetition. The soul begins to resonate with similar energies, attracting experiences and circumstances that mirror inner misalignment. Escaping the web requires recognition. The first step is seeing the chains for what they are, understanding that every repeated misdeed not only disturbs the individual but also contributes to the collective darkness. Only conscious alignment with the laws of creation, guided by the inner voice of conscience and intuition, can begin to unravel the threads. Chapter 6: Temptation and Resonance, the Real Gate of Entry. Temptation is often misunderstood as an external force. In truth, it is the reflection of inner resonance. The soul vibrates in certain ways. These vibrations attract external forms that correspond to inner weaknesses, desires, or unresolved tendencies. The world mirrors the internal state of the spirit. The Grail Message clarifies that temptation is the doorway through which sin enters. It is subtle and persuasive, often disguised as necessity, comfort, or opportunity. By recognizing the resonance within, the soul can see temptation for what it truly is, an invitation to misalignment, not a punishment imposed from outside. Overcoming temptation is therefore not simply resisting external circumstances, it is correcting the inner vibration. The spirit must attune itself to the laws of creation, allowing the light of understanding to neutralize the attractive pull of error before it manifests as action. Chapter 7: The Power of Images, How Thoughts Become Living Forms. Every thought carries creative potential. Thoughts are not fleeting or powerless, they are formative forces in the spiritual realm. When negative, selfish, or harmful thoughts are repeated, they gain energy and form, eventually acting as independent spiritual entities that influence both the thinker and the surrounding environment. The Grail Message emphasizes that images in the mind are like seeds. Thoughts of anger, envy, greed, or pride grow into energetic forms that attract similar influences and experiences. These, living forms, can subtly guide behavior, strengthen habitual sin, and obscure the path to the light. The antidote lies in conscious thought cultivation. By replacing harmful images with ones of clarity, love, and service, the soul begins to dissolve the forms of darkness it has previously created. Purity of thought leads to purification of action, which ultimately unbinds the spirit from the chains of its own making. Chapter 8: The Great Sun of Spiritual Laziness. Among the most insidious gates of sin is spiritual laziness, a subtle, pervasive neglect of the inner life. Unlike overt wrongdoing, spiritual laziness does not always appear harmful. It manifests as apathy, distraction, and a preference for ease over conscious effort. Yet, it is a profound enabler of sin. The Grail Message warns that spiritual laziness allows darkness to accumulate unseen. When the soul neglects awareness, cultivation of conscience, and alignment with divine law, the threads of error strengthen unnoticed. Thoughts, desires, and habits once fleeting solidify into chains. The spirit becomes increasingly susceptible to temptation, deception, and misalignment with the universal order. Spiritual laziness is the great sun, because it casts a shadow over all aspects of life. Every omission, every ignored inner voice, every evasion of duty feeds its power. The only remedy is active engagement with the spirit, meditation, reflection, self-examination, and conscious action. In this way, the sun of spiritual laziness can be replaced by the radiance of awakened vigilance and moral clarity. Part 3: The Consequences of Sin. Chapter 9: The Law of Reciprocal Action and the Harvest of Error. In the order of creation, every action carries a consequence. This is not a judgment imposed from outside but a natural law, the law of reciprocal action. Each misdeed, each thought or deed misaligned with divine order, sets in motion an energetic reaction. The Grail Message teaches that the universe is a living reflection of spiritual laws. What one sows in thought, word, and deed, one will inevitably reap. The harvest of error manifests in multiple ways. It may appear as personal misfortune, inner suffering, lost opportunities, or strained relationships. In spiritual terms, each act of sin creates a disturbance in the soul, which the spirit must correct over time. Repeated transgressions accumulate like a heavy crop of weeds, entangling the soul, clouding judgment, and prolonging the journey back to harmony with the laws of creation. The key insight is responsibility and awareness. The spirit must recognize that the consequences of sin are not external punishments but natural returns of the energy one has released. Understanding this law fosters vigilance, humility, and a desire to align actions with the divine order, thus beginning the transformation of error into wisdom. Chapter 10. The Burdened Soul. Guilt, Suffering, and Inner Pain. Guilt is the voice of the spirit, whispering the recognition of misalignment. The Grail Message illuminates that guilt, when understood, is not a condemnation but a guide, a reminder that the soul has deviated from the law of life. Suffering, too, is the echo of inner imbalance, a messenger calling for self-examination, realignment, and correction. The burdened soul experiences pain in many forms: physical, emotional, psychological, or spiritual. The spirit feels the weight of unresolved actions, the tension of suppressed recognition, and the resonance of accumulated error. Those who ignore these inner voices fall into deeper bondage, as guilt turns into despair, suffering into inertia, and inner pain into habitual self-doubt. Liberation comes through conscious engagement with the law of recognition, repentance, and corrective action. The soul must face the inner truth, not flee from it. By transforming guilt into conscious understanding and suffering into spiritual awakening, the chains of sin begin to loosen, allowing the spirit to ascend towards freedom. Chapter 11. Karma, Destiny, and the Correction of the Spirit. Karma is the natural record of the soul's actions, woven through time like a tapestry of cause and effect. It is not fate in the deterministic sense but the reflection of spiritual alignment or misalignment. Every thought, intention, and deed contributes to the shaping of destiny. The Grail Message explains that karma is an instrument of learning and correction, designed to awaken recognition and understanding in the soul. Destiny, therefore, is not arbitrary. The soul attracts circumstances that correspond to its inner state, providing opportunities for correction and growth. The consequences of sin, experienced as misfortune or hardship, are the opportunities the spirit has created for itself to reclaim alignment with divine law. The correction of the spirit is the conscious participation in this natural order. It is the willingness to transform thought, intention, and action, to release the accumulated energy of error, and to cultivate qualities of light, humility, love, patience, and service. Through this conscious correction, karma becomes a ladder of ascent rather than a burden, guiding the soul back to freedom and harmony. Chapter 12. Collective Sin, National, Tribal, and Religious Guilt. Sin is not limited to the individual. Humanity is interconnected, and the deeds of one influence the whole. When entire communities, tribes, or nations engage in misalignment, through oppression, violence, deceit, or fanaticism, the consequences are magnified. Collective sin forms a dense field of darkness, affecting not only the perpetrators but also the innocent, the environment, and future generations. Religious, cultural, and national guilt manifests in wars, strife, economic collapse, social injustice, and the perpetuation of suffering. The Grail Message teaches that these collective consequences are the echo of spiritual dissonance on a large scale, highlighting the necessity for recognition, repentance, and collective correction. Communities can break free from these cycles by fostering conscious spiritual leadership, education in truth, and shared commitment to justice and compassion. Recognition of collective error, coupled with active steps toward repair and moral realignment, can restore balance and gradually dissolve the web of darkness enveloping society. Part 4. The Path Out of Sin. Chapter 13. Recognition. The First Break in the Chains. The path out of sin begins with recognition. The Grail Message teaches that before the soul can be freed, it must first see clearly where it has strayed. Recognition is not mere intellectual acknowledgement, it is the inner awakening of the spirit to the truth of its own misalignment. Recognition illuminates the shadows, allowing the soul to discern between what is in harmony with divine law and what is contrary to it. It brings a moment of stillness, a pause where the spirit can witness its own thoughts, feelings, and deeds without justification or denial. In this stillness, the chains of error begin to loosen. The power of recognition lies in its transformative effect. The soul that recognizes its error becomes aware of the natural consequences it has attracted, and this awareness itself begins the process of release. Without recognition, all attempts at correction are superficial, like trying to heal a wound without seeing it. Recognition opens the door to true repentance and the active pursuit of purification. Chapter 14. Repentance. A movement of the spirit, not the lips. Repentance is the conscious turning of the soul away from error and toward alignment with divine law. It is not a mere verbal expression of regret, it is a movement of the inner being. The Grail Message emphasizes that the lips may speak sorrow, but only the spirit that acts in truth achieves real correction. True repentance arises from inner recognition and manifests in intention, thought, and action. It is accompanied by a sincere desire to dissolve the patterns that gave rise to sin and to replace them with thoughts and deeds of light. Repentance also restores the connection to the inner moral compass, the conscience, which has been dulled by repeated misalignment. Through this process, the soul learns humility, acknowledging both its errors and its potential for alignment. It is the first active step in breaking free from the web of darkness and restoring the natural flow of spiritual energy. Chapter 15. The Art of Reversal. How Good Dissolves Evil. The Grail Message reveals that spiritual energy follows natural laws. Good thought and action dissolve the energy of error. The art of reversal is the conscious practice of replacing negative thoughts, intentions, and deeds with positive, life-affirming actions. Every act of genuine goodness, love, compassion, forgiveness, service, counters the energy of error, loosening the spiritual bonds formed by sin. This is not magic, it is the natural law of cause and effect operating in the spiritual realm. Evil is not annihilated by condemnation or denial but transformed through light. Reversal requires perseverance and awareness. The spirit must actively cultivate thoughts that align with truth, rejecting the allure of repeated temptation and the inertia of habit. Through this patient and deliberate work, the soul begins to experience the tangible liberation that comes when darkness is replaced by conscious light. Chapter 16. The Journey of Purification. Thought, Desire, Action. Purification is the comprehensive work of the spirit, involving thought, desire, and action. Sin enters through all three, through erroneous thinking, misaligned desires, and wrongful deeds. Therefore, the path out of sin must address each dimension. The Grail Message instructs that purification begins in thought. The spirit must cultivate clarity, discernment, and recognition of the subtle influences that lead toward error. Desire must then be purified. The soul learns to attune longing to truth and divine order, replacing fleeting pleasures with enduring spiritual fulfillment. Finally, action must reflect the harmony discovered in thought and desire, manifesting as service, love, and justice in the world. This triad, thought, desire, action, forms the framework for spiritual rebirth. As the soul progresses along this path, the chains of sin weaken, and the spirit experiences freedom, peace, and the joy of alignment with the law of life. The journey is gradual, requiring persistence and vigilance, yet it is always guided by the inner light of conscience and the living word of truth. Part 5. Living Above Sin. Chapter 17. The Right Attitude Towards God and His Laws. The Grail Message emphasizes that living above sin begins with the proper understanding of God and His laws. God is not a distant judge meting out punishment, He is the living principle, the law of all life, the source of order and harmony in the universe. To live above sin, the spirit must cultivate reverence, understanding, and alignment with this divine order. The right attitude towards God involves recognition of His presence in every aspect of life and an awareness of the universal laws that govern creation. Law is not restriction but the framework within which life thrives. Those who misunderstand it perceive it as harsh or punitive, yet in truth, it is protective and formative. By aligning with the law of God, the soul ceases to rebel against natural consequences. Thoughts, desires, and actions harmonize with creation, and the temptations that once ensnared the spirit lose their power. Respect, reverence, and conscious obedience are not passive, they are dynamic forces that safeguard the soul and cultivate the conditions for true freedom. Chapter 18. Purity is power, the radiance that repels darkness. Purity is not merely abstinence or external correctness. It is the inner radiance of a spirit that has learned to think, desire, and act in harmony with the law. The Grail Message teaches that purity is a living force. It illuminates the inner world, strengthens the spirit, and naturally repels the influence of darkness. A pure thought is a seed of light. A pure desire aligns the soul with higher ideals. A pure action resonates through the web of creation, producing constructive energy. When the spirit maintains this inner clarity, the shadows of sin, error, and temptation are unable to gain foothold. Purity is therefore a power that the spirit wields consciously or unconsciously. Those who cultivate it become beacons, their presence stabilizing and elevating the surrounding environment. The radiance of purity is protective. It shields the soul from error, attracts truth, and awakens others to the possibility of liberation. Chapter 19. The life of a liberated spirit. Joy, peace, clarity. To live above sin is to enter a life of liberation. The Grail Message describes this as a state of inner joy, peace, and clarity. The liberated spirit no longer wavers between error and truth, between self-interest and service. Joy arises naturally when the soul lives in alignment with the law, free from the burdens of guilt, regret, or self-deception. Peace comes when the inner world is harmonious and resistant to the disruptions of temptation or outside influence. Clarity is the result of an unclouded conscience and the unbroken recognition of divine order. In this state, the spirit can perceive truth directly. Choices become effortless, guided by insight rather than impulse. The liberated life is marked not by perfection but by continuous awareness, constant striving towards the light, and unwavering alignment with the principles of creation. Chapter 20. The victory of the light in the soul. The ultimate goal of living above sin is the victory of the light in the soul. The Grail Message teaches that light is not merely absence of darkness, but the presence of the living word, the active alignment of thought, desire, and action with the divine. Victory is achieved through recognition, repentance, reversal, purification, and sustained effort in truth and service. The soul gradually sheds the residues of error, cultivating strength, wisdom, and spiritual discernment. Darkness may still attempt to influence, but the spirit, anchored in light, remains steadfast. This victory is not temporary or conditional, it is the firm establishment of spiritual freedom. The liberated soul becomes a co-worker with the divine, radiating light, serving life, and inspiring others through example. The Grail Message calls this the true human destiny: to rise above sin, to live in light, and to become a channel of divine order in a world often clouded by misunderstanding and error. Conclusion. Sin is not destiny. The light waits for all who turn. The human spirit is never condemned to remain in darkness. Sin is not an unchangeable destiny but a state that arises from misunderstanding, misalignment, and unconscious error. The Grail Message teaches that every soul retains the ability to turn toward the light, to recognize the error, and to consciously align with the divine law of creation. True liberation begins with recognition, acknowledging the shadow within oneself without self-condemnation. Repentance follows naturally, a movement of the spirit, not merely lips. Through this inner turning, the soul awakens to its inherent freedom, and the chains of darkness dissolve. The light is patient, eternal, and impartial. It waits for all who make the conscious effort to align thought, desire, and action with truth. No matter how deeply entangled a soul may be in error, the path to redemption remains open. This conclusion emphasizes the Grail principle. Every soul can rise above sin and experience the joy, clarity, and peace of true spiritual life. Epilogue. The coming age of light and the cleansing of the earth. The dawn of a new age approaches, an era in which the collective awakening of humanity will illuminate the world. As individuals turn toward the light and live according to the laws of creation, the effects ripple outward, cleansing the earth of accumulated error, selfishness, and unconscious sin. This coming age is not merely a metaphorical promise, it is a call to active participation. Every act of recognition, repentance, and constructive service contributes to the spiritual restoration of the planet. Humanity stands at the threshold of a time when love, wisdom, and truth will increasingly guide thought, desire, and action. The Grail Message envisions a world in which the law of creation is understood and consciously applied, where inner purification becomes a daily practice, and where light and life prevail over darkness and error. The epilogue reminds us that the responsibility for this cleansing begins within each human heart. Appendix A. The laws of creation in summary. Law of reciprocal action. Every thought, desire, and action generates corresponding effects. Nothing is lost, and nothing escapes correction. Law of free will. The human spirit has freedom to choose. Choices aligned with the law bring harmony, while misalignment leads to correction. Law of recognition. Awareness of error is the first step to liberation. Truth cannot work in unrecognized darkness. Law of reversal. Consciously replacing error with alignment dissolves the energetic imprint of sin. Law of service. Constructive service strengthens the spirit, dissolves error, and radiates light into the world. Law of love and justice. True spiritual growth is founded on love guided by justice, harmonizing all relations. Appendix B. Examples of sin in modern life. Materialism. Excessive attachment to possessions or wealth at the expense of spiritual development. Dishonesty. Lies, manipulation, and deception in personal or professional life. Addiction and excess. Uncontrolled indulgence in food, drink, or harmful habits that enslave the spirit. Hatred and revenge. Harboring resentment, perpetuating cycles of anger and violence. Neglect of responsibility. Avoiding accountability in relationships, society, and stewardship of creation. Collective errors. Societal or political actions that harm others, driven by greed, ideology, or unconscious conformity. Each example illustrates how sin manifests energetically and morally, providing the soul with opportunities to recognize, correct, and align with the light. Appendix C. Practical daily exercises for inner purification. Morning reflection. Observe thoughts and feelings from the previous day, recognize errors without judgment. Conscious reversal. Identify one negative thought or action and consciously replace it with constructive alignment. Purification of desire. Throughout the day, monitor desires, redirect those that arise from selfishness toward service or truth. Evening review. Contemplate the day's actions, note successes and areas needing adjustment. Service practice. Dedicate at least one act each day to serve life, others, or creation without expectation. These exercises strengthen the will, sharpen conscience, and gradually dissolve the hold of habitual error. Appendix D. Meditation on light, purity, and truth. Step 1. Centering. Sit quietly, breathe deeply, and feel your inner presence. Step 2. Visualization. Imagine a radiant light descending into your heart, dissolving all darkness and impurities. Step 3. Recognition. Mentally acknowledge areas of error, weakness, or attachment. Step 4. Alignment. Direct your will to harmonize thought, desire, and action with truth and life. Step 5. Radiance. Expand the light outward, enveloping your environment, loved ones, and the world. Step 6. Gratitude and surrender. Offer your awareness to the guidance of the living word and the law of creation. Daily practice deepens inner clarity, strengthens the soul's resilience, and awakens the spirit to its true purpose.